All right, you guys ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, so David, say hello.
Hello.
Gary, say hello.
Hello.
And I'm Kent Fortner, and I have the honor of sitting with somebody who's extremely important to me, Chef David, and his father, who's also important to me, but doesn't work for me. I'm going to wear two hats on this one. I have the honor of being the president of the Mare Island Historic Park Foundation, and we have wanted to do an oral interview with a multi-generational family for a while, and of course, I know a little bit about your guys' story. Other part is we've got the 10th anniversary podcast for the Mare Island Brewing Company, and we wanted to throw something on there, kind of in Chef in your honor a little bit as well. So we're going to kill two birds with one stone here, if that works for you guys.
Sure.
And it's going to be a little freewheeling. For the listener out there, we're sitting in the Admiral's Mansion. I didn't realize, David, this is the first time you've ever been in it?
Never been in here before.
I'm stunned by that.
Yeah.
Had you been in here before?
Yes, I've been in here before.
Back when you worked on the island?
Couple occasions back when I worked, yeah.
So this is the Admiral's Mansions where the head of the island lived when they operated out of here.
Correct.
One story you guys may or may not know is in the backyard, and we can look at it afterwards, there's brick paths all through the backyard. I can't remember his name, but the admiral who lived here during World War II, at the end of the stressful day of, you can imagine the stress of working on Mare Island during World War II, he would go out and lay a couple more layers or rows of bricks on these bricks paths every day. It was kind of his Zen, whatever. And so every time I'm in the backyard and walking those bricks, I just think of all the stress that went into that whole thing when I get there. So That's outside, we're inside, we'll go from there. So I'm going to start a little bit backwards. I'm going to start with David.
Okay.
Who I'm going to refer to as Chef because that's how I know him all the way through.
Yeah.
So Chef, I want to know what Mare Island meant to you growing up. Like, what was it? Did it loom large? Was it, what was your impressions of it? Did you get to visit? That kind of thing.
Well, growing up, my dad obviously worked here, and basically all of his friends and people that would come by the house worked here as well. So to me, it seemed like where everybody went to go work. In my world, everybody that I knew worked on Mare Island. At that point, yes. My best friend growing up who lived across the street, his father worked on Mare Island. Few people on our street, growing up, their kids I would play with, their dads or moms worked on Mare Island. It just seemed that everybody that I knew, their parents or one of their parents worked on Mare Island. And it just seemed like in my world, that's where people worked. I didn't really put two and two together that there was other places that people worked. It just everybody that I knew, their parents, talked about working on Mare Island.
And without dating you, can I ask when you were born? Just so
I was born in 82.
82.
Yep.
And so did you get to visit the island much when you were younger?
I did a little bit. So like I said, my best friend's dad worked here, and my best friend loved to go fishing.
Okay.
And there's a pier on the south end of the island that I don't think you can even get to anymore. But he would take us fishing on that pier a lot. Tens, maybe even 100 times we've been fishing out on this pier. And
That's the old Coast Guard pier.
Yeah, so we would get in.
All the way south.
All the way south.
All the way south.
You go all the way to the south.
No, I've been out on it. I know where it's at.
Where the Coast Guard station used to be.
Okay.
So that was the fishing pier. And we'd go out there, and there's other people fishing out there, and we'd spend the whole day out there. We'd catch crab and striped bass, and hooked a sturgeon once, but never was able to bring it in. The pier's pretty tall, so to get it up out of the water and up onto the pier was kind of an issue. But spent many Saturdays and Sundays fishing on that pier on the south end of the island.
And could you just come and go from the island back then, or was there some sort of
So as long
shack?
as you had, the tags on your car,
Your sticker and your windshield.
Yep.
Okay.
And you had your badge, you were able to go on, and you were able to bring, I don't know what the rules were, but
Not much,
they never gave them any flack about bringing us children onto the island.
Okay.
It was like he showed his badge, yep, they're with you, and let us in, and we could do whatever we wanted to do. Now with him, he worked in the secured area, so I wasn't allowed to go to where his shop was.
Okay.
So within the island, there was an actual higher security area that you needed special badges to go into, and he worked there, but that was an area that people that didn't have the badge just weren't allowed to go. So I never actually went to work at or went to the shop that my dad worked at just because he was in that secured area.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to get to how you came back to Mare Island, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But we were just talking about this before we got the recording devices going. So I knew you guys had some other relatives, and then you guys started rattling it off, and I was like, boy, I need a flow chart on this. But
Yeah.
can we try again? Like, give me a rough rundown of
I
who
can
else.
try.
can
My
remember.
dad might be able to help
I'll
me.
help
but,
you.
So
Yeah.
my dad obviously retired from Mare Island when it closed in '96. His father worked on Mare Island. He was actually had something to do with the mud puppy, and we can get to that story
Oh.
here in a little bit.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Okay.
So his father worked on Mare Island, and then on my mom's side, both of her parents, my grandma and my grandpa, both of my mom's parents worked on Mare Island, and then her grandfather worked on Mare Island, and her
And
great
grandmother.
and grandmother
Oh my gosh.
worked on the island, and then the great grandfather worked on Mare Island. That was the fifth, the start of it.
Right.
On his side, on my dad's side, my dad, his aunt, right? Your mom's sister,
My mom's sister, she worked here. Yeah.
and then I don't know if there's any other
My
generations.
dad's dad was a fireman, so in Modesto.
Okay.
But mostly on my mom's side is where, and on my wife's side, his mom's
Yeah,
side is where.
both worked here. So I'd say you, grandpa, both my other grandparents, the grandparent, the aunt, probably 6 or 7 different relatives.
We've got 7 fingers out here so far. Just
Yep.
7,
And there
including
could be
myself,
more.
maybe 8.
Yeah,
That we know of, like for sure.
Wow.
So yeah, like 7 or 8 of our family relatives all worked
Dating
on
all the
Mare
way back to World War II.
Really?
With my grandfather. So that, he was definitely here during the war effort. He lived out in the Farragut Terrace out there, what was it called back in the day?
Well, I don't even know.
Yeah, anyway. So
Let's switch gears here.
Sure.
So you grew up in it too, Gary. I mean, was your experience similar to what David's describing, that just everybody around you worked for Mare Island?
Pretty much when, so my story begins when I got out of the Air Force. So I did 3 years in the Air Force. I was a B-52 tail gunner. Did a tour over in Vietnam. So came home. The war was over in 1974. They didn't need us anymore. So they were, doing, Air Force was doing a slight reduction on the B-52 crews. So they let me out early. I got out a year early, and
How old were you at this point, roughly?
so that was 1973 when I got out. So
Okay.
I was 22.
Okay.
And so I'd already been in for 3 years because I got drafted and went into the Air Force instead of being drafted.
Got it.
Anyway, came home, and my dad was already working here. My dad worked here since '67.
Okay.
And so I was a junior in high school then. And so I'd been out to Mare Island multiple times with him on the mud puppy, so that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, we
too.
definitely have to talk about
Yeah,
the mud
yeah.
puppy.
So I knew Mare Island. A lot of my friends, their family worked for Mare Island. Their parents, like Dave said, their parents worked for Mare Island.
Okay.
So,
Was it a foregone conclusion that you were going to work for Mare Island one
Well,
day, do you think?
I got out of the service. I was a veteran. I heard Mare Island was hiring.
Okay.
And they wanted, you got veterans preference. So you got 5 points above everybody else on your rating scale. And so take the test, aced it. So you get 100 points for that, plus 5 points for veterans. So you're higher than anybody else. So they just took basically veterans and started as a helper in Shop 51, electrical shop.
Okay.
Electrical shop on the boats. So I was working on the boats I got out in March, and I worked there till May.
Okay.
And in May, they opened up the apprenticeship for that year. So I applied for the apprenticeship
Okay.
in May, started the apprenticeship in August of '74.
All right.
And 4-year apprenticeship, so I went through a 4-year apprenticeship.
Did you get to pick what you wanted to apprentice for, or did they pigeonhole you based on your...
You had a little, dream sheet, so to call, and I think it was 5. So list your 5 shops.
Okay.
And they're all different trades, obviously. We had 17 different shops on the shipyard at least, and they were all different trades. So
Do you remember?
I knew what some of them were.
Do you remember your 5?
I don't remember off the top, but I do know I wanted to get into electronics.
Okay.
I'd already been working as a helper, so I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and so then from that, next part of the process was the shops would interview you as a candidate.
Okay.
And if they liked you, you got in. So that was the process back in the day. And of course, my veterans preference helped with the apprenticeship program also.
Sure.
So that's how I got into being from a helper when I first started into the apprenticeship.
Well, I have to, for the listener out there, you just need to know there's no way on God's green earth that anybody would not take either of the Starr folks that I'm sitting with after an interview to come join them in somewhere, because they're 2 of the nicest people I've ever met. So how many years total did you work on the island then?
So with 3 years in the military.
Yep.
And so I worked there 22 years.
Oh, gosh.
So that gave me a total with military credit of 25 years, and I got 25 years to the day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then
Mare Island had already closed on April 1st,
1996.
1996.
Yes.
My 25-year date was May 26th.
Oh, my gosh.
So under rules that are currently still in place even today, you can have annual leave to cover that period of time, 6 weeks. And since we were under closure, you could save as much annual leave as you wanted. So I saved up all my annual leave just to make that.
Just extended it out?
That 6 weeks. And that's how I retired with 25 years, which is minimum at any age.
Sure.
And that's how I got my retirement.
Oh, man, you're a smart man.
Right.
All right, let's go back another generation.
Sure.
What do you remember from previous generations? You said, who was during World War II? It was
That would be my great-grandfather.
your great-grandfather.
I'm sorry,
your
my grandfather. My
Do you
grandfather.
remember your grandfather
Oh, yeah,
very well?
Sure. He lived in Jamestown near Sonora. I don't remember a whole lot of the stories from
Okay.
that era that he told. He was kind of a quiet guy. He didn't talk very much.
Okay.
I learned a lot of it from my grandmother, his wife, about all the stuff that he used to do, and a lot of that right now I simply can't remember.
Sure,
It's that old.
sure.
I mean, I was 9, 10, 11 years old back in those days before he died. So, but my sister has done a lot of genealogy and history and
Okay,
stuff like that.
okay.
My mom wrote a genealogy book of both of her side of the family, the light side of the family,
Okay.
her side, and the Starr side of the family, my dad's side.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that might be documented in there about his service in Mare Island, and who else might have been working there too at the time.
Well, I know we have a couple photographs of your family, all the
Yeah.
people that worked, whatever. We'll throw those up on the podcast
Sure.
side and on the foundation side, just so people can see that when they get to it. So tell me about, like, roughly how many people were working on the island. Do you remember when you joined up back in there? I mean, we're talking 5,000, 15,000, 25,000? Do you have a
I
sense?
would have to guess that it was, when I started in '74, I would say there's in excess of 20,000.
Okay, so it was rocking.
We were not building boats then. Our last boat, I think, was built in 1970, possibly, before I started.
Okay.
But during construction, 30,000, 40,000. The height of World War II, possibly, I've read reports of 50,000.
I've heard that too.
So there's that kind of population. And we maintained that employment population through pretty much through the whole years, because we were very, very busy doing overhauls and maintenance and on the nuclear subs, nuclear destroyers, stuff like that. So yeah, we maintain easily 20,000 per year. So,
And let me ask, I don't even know how to couch this question, but
sure.
when you worked here, was it, I love this work here, I love being Mare Island? Was it, hey, this is just a good job and I'm glad to have a good job because I have a family? Or was it like, man, 25 years in a day and I'm out of here because this is drudgery? Like, well, I know it was a different era also, but I'm curious.
it
And
was.
Chef, I'm not asking you this question. I'm not asking you this question because you work for us over there and I don't want to hear the answer. Now, we're okay.
So yeah, I mean, back in the day, like Dave was talking about, when everybody we knew worked here, it was the greatest place to
It was?
work.
Okay.
Absolutely the greatest place. You had security, you had a government job, federal employee, great health care,
Yeah.
good pay for the time.
Sure.
Yeah, it was the best place to work in this whole area, Vallejo,
Okay.
Benicia, Napa, American Canyon for what it was back in the day. But yeah, and it was, you know, a stable job. You could raise a family. You didn't have to be worried about laying off.
Yeah.
You didn't have to worry about, you know, where your paycheck was coming from.
Got it.
And Vallejo itself was a great town back then.
Yeah.
You know, plenty of support from the community, plenty of support from Mare Island. So yeah, it was a great place to work, and Vallejo was a great place to live back then.
So tell me what was the impression of Napa back then?
I lived in Napa,
Okay.
actually. I actually went to Napa High and graduated from
Oh
Napa
my gosh.
High.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So that was, we originally moved to Vallejo when my dad first started at the shipyard, and we rented a house in Vallejo for a year, and he decided that he wanted to move the family to Napa the next year. So I did my junior year, 1967 to 68 in Vallejo, and my senior year, 68 to 69 in Napa. And then I joined the service. I was in Napa. When I got out of the service, I went back to Napa. So I lived in Napa 2 or 3 years after I got out of the service, worked at Mare Island the whole time. It was different.
Compared to Vallejo, which one was more happening?
Actually, I was into cars then. I've always been into cars.
Okay, yeah,
the
yeah.
Napa car scene was more happening
It was okay.
than Vallejo.
All right.
Cruise night, you know, Thursday night cruise night, you know, all the car stuff.
Oh, you tell me stories about drag racing up and down Jefferson
yeah.
Street.
Jefferson.
Jefferson was the drag strip.
Jefferson was the strip.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Well,
So it was different, you know. I had already gone to Vallejo school. I'd already gone to Napa school. So, you know, I kind of got, you know, a vibe for
Wasn't
that.
Vallejo still pretty rough?
Yeah.
I mean,
Even back then, huh?
Even back then.
It has its rough edges, you know. Napa was more laid back, more country, you know, less urban, you know.
because it wasn't the wine scene. I mean,
Oh no, not in the
the
70s.
Paris was 74 or something, and it really started coming around from there. So you're, I mean, the wine guys up there were kind of considered a little bit wacky farmers, you know, for the most part back then, if I understand it.
Yeah.
Well, so it's a good pivot for us because, so just from my perspective, we had lost our chef, which I use the term loosely, but we had lost our chef at the time at the brewing company because we were very small. We didn't have a really intense program or whatever. And Brian, business partner and great friend, comes to me and is like, "Hey, I got this guy. I can't believe he wants to come down here and work with us, but like, you know, you should see this resume." And he hands me your resume, David. And I was like, wow. So tell me from your perspective what your experience was with the brewing company and sort of coming home, if you will. I don't know
love
what it was.
telling this story. So it was, I don't know, 2013, 2014, before you opened the tap room. I've lived in Vallejo for most of my life. Even as an adult, moved out of my parents, lived in Vallejo still. I still consider this my home. I've lived in Sacramento and San Jose and Napa, but I've always considered Vallejo my home base. And so 2013-ish, maybe early 2014, I'm walking my dog on the waterfront, and I see the window, the big things in the window of the ferry building, because it wasn't the tap room back then.
Right.
And it was like, brewery coming soon, and Mare Island Brewing Company, and I'm like, heck yeah.
Yeah.
This is going to be the greatest thing to happen to Vallejo right here. Like, we need this. So I spent most of my time cooking in Napa. And so we always have the great, you know, spots to eat. We have the great local.
Come on, let's list some of these off. Bricks.
Yeah. So yeah, I worked at Bricks. I worked at Domaine Shandon. I worked at some restaurants in St. Helena. I worked at Silverado Country Club. I've worked at the Archer Hotel. I worked for Charlie Palmer for a couple years, celebrity chef. So decent resume.
Yeah, you're underselling it. But yes, an amazing resume. I mean, if anybody knows Napa, they'll know all those names.
So I felt like Vallejo's always needed something like this. Needed a place for people to enjoy good beer, a good atmosphere, and a brewing company at that time was like, this is going to be perfect. So walking by the ferry building, seeing the signs on the window, tap room coming soon, couldn't wait. Could not wait. Super excited for the whole thing. At this point, I had no idea who Kent Fortner was. I had no idea who Ryan Gibbons was.
Right.
It was just Mare Island Brewing Company, and it was like, Mare Island, all right. Like, this is they're
family.
bringing back the history.
The heirloom.
Yeah, exactly. So, a couple months later, walking my dog, it's open. I got to go in and have a beer. And this is like late 2014, like November, I think.
Okay.
So 2014. And I think it's probably one of my first Instagram posts, and it's probably still on my Instagram page now, is like, it's a picture of 2 pints on the railing and at the ferry tap room on the patio looking out over the water, and the post is like, I'm so glad this place is here. This is going to be great for Vallejo.
Yeah.
Like that's my literal post.
It warms my heart.
From 2014.
Yeah.
And I would bring friends there. I'd bring family there. I'd walk my dog on the waterfront a lot. I'd stop in and have a beer. Bring my nieces. They got Jones sodas. I'd have a beer. We'd hang out. We'd keep walking. That was it was the thing to do. And at the time, there wasn't much of a kitchen.
Right.
There was a panini press, maybe, like a chip tree, little bags of chips on a little tree hanging on the bar. And then at one point they were doing like pizzas from the local pizzeria.
Yep.
And, I just thought, man, like, wouldn't it be cool to be like the chef of this place? Like, honest to God, these were my thoughts back in like 2015. Like, man, it'd be so cool to be able to be a chef at a cool place like this in my hometown. It would be a dream come true.
Nice.
Honestly, honest to God. So, fast forward to 2019, I'm working at the hotel. It just so happens that Ryan's wife is a server at that same hotel in the restaurant. We work closely with each other. I was the chef in charge of the Sunday brunch. She worked Sunday brunch as a server. And and my boss, the executive chef, came to me and said, hey, would you want to come work for this brewery down in Vallejo? And at the time, we were having a really good time at the hotel. Mm-hmm. We were hitting stride. We got a great staff. We were doing great food. We were working a lot, but it was a lot of fun. And I originally told my boss, you know what? Like, I'm really happy here.
Right.
And so he went back to Ryan and said, I don't know if my guy's interested. And then maybe the very next week, I thought about it for a little while. And the very next week, I saw Aaliyah in the elevator, on the service elevator. We were going downstairs, and I was like, hey, are you guys still looking for a chef? And she grabbed me by the arm. She said, yes, are you interested? And I said, yeah, I am. And 10 minutes later, I get a call from Ryan.
Of course.
And he's like, we need to talk.
That's how Ryan works.
And so kind of backing up a little bit on how I met Ryan originally was, like, we all had worked at the same restaurant together.
Yeah.
We all worked at Domaine Chandon at Etoile. And I worked there prior to Ryan, but a lot of the same staff was there, and so we all knew each other through degrees of separation. So I saw Ryan one day. I was walking my dog on the waterfront, and I saw him. He was pulling empty kegs out of the keg area and loading them up in the truck. And I said, hey, Frankie, my boss, Francisco Lopez, the executive chef there at the time, worked with Ryan directly at Chandon. I said, hey, Frankie says hello. And then he was like, oh, I was like, yeah, I work with him now at the Archer in Napa. I'm the executive sous chef there. And he was like, oh, great, man, I'm trying to get into the Archer with the beer. And I was like, okay, well, I'll talk to Peter Triolo.
Nice.
And I'll see if I can set something up. And this is prior to me even working for Mare Island. So I'm at the hotel still. I go to the food and beverage director, and I say, hey, there's this great brewery in Vallejo. They want to try to get into the hotel, maybe on tap somewhere. And he's like, yeah, let's hook it up. And it just so happened that at the same time at that hotel, we were running a Type 75 liquor license, which required us to brew a certain amount of beer on property in order for us to keep our liquor license. And we had gone through a couple of contract brewers prior, and they all burned us. They were all flakes. They all flaked out on us. So then Peter reached out to Ryan and said, hey, would you be interested in doing contract brewing for us so we can keep our liquor license? And then that's how I started meeting the production side of the brewery. I met Elise, and I met
Yeah.
Kieran, and
Yeah.
I met all these guys that worked. And I was always just like, hey, if you guys need anything, if you need lunch, if you need towels or cleaning supplies, let me know. I'm right downstairs. And so that's kind of how I got my in with the staff at Mare Island, was like, hey, these guys are really cool. They're in my hometown. I want to treat them like
And then we were
royalty.
like, yeah, we need a chef.
Yeah. So then that's how the whole thing came about, with my boss coming to me saying, hey, do you want this gig?
Yeah,
And I
because
said-
Ryan had reached out to him.
to
I mean,
Frankie, yeah.
we're very careful not to poach. That's
Sure.
something we try not to do too
And so
much.
Ryan went to my boss and was like, hey, we're interested in your executive sous. And so that's when my boss came to me and said, hey, do you want to do this? And then I told him no initially.
Yeah.
And so then about a week later, the elevator with Leah, that all happened. 10 minutes later, got the phone call. I was sitting down with you guys, I think the next week.
Well, and I remember because I was like, we can't afford this resume, never in a million years. And then Ryan was like, well, he and a lot of his ancestor worked on Mare Island, and I was like, well, if he gets what we do, then he'll be, this could work on the whole thing.
Okay.
So let's switch back to something you guys mentioned, because I want to hear the mud puppy story from Gary, from your point of view, or from what you know about it, because we've talked about the story.
Yeah.
As with all my history, I always tell people I get it 75 to 85% right, and I'm not really quite sure what that 15 to 20% is. But tell me about the mud puppy from your perspective.
So it was 1968, I believe.
Okay.
We lived in Napa. I was 16 years old. My dad was in charge of, since the Guitarra was a brand new submarine, it had all brand new equipment. My dad was in charge of contractors installing all the sonar equipment. So that was his job. He actually did not work for Mare Island Naval Shipyard. He worked for NAVSEA.
To the contract.
Now, he was a government employee,
Okay.
but he was in charge of contractors that would then install the equipment. So he got a call, I'm guessing like 8 o'clock at night, and he says, hey, you want to go to Mare Island? And he says, I got to go down there. And I said, sure, I'll go along. I didn't know the exact words or anything. So we hop on the car, we get down there, and right about, and I'm not sure exactly where, but it's in front of the coal sheds.
It's right in front of the coal sheds.
Right in front of the coal sheds is where the Guitarra was parked. So when we get there, there are lights everywhere.
Okay.
And it's already in the water, already submerged by the time we get there. He got a call, supposedly it was going down. So when we get there, all I remember is the water was up to the diving planes.
Oh my gosh.
So
it's
I remember sitting in the mud.
Yeah.
Because that's about as far down as it's going to go. But
Okay.
the water was already above the top of the deck and all the way up to the diving planes.
Wow. And what was the general reaction from the public, or what was this had to be crazy, an embarrassment?
All of that, right.
All of that?
It didn't get out at first into the newspapers. Obviously,
okay.
The Navy kind of kept things under wraps. And eventually it did get out. I'm not sure exactly how long it took before the local newspapers caught wind of it and stuff like that.
Right.
Because again, it's, and the Navy doesn't always broadcast they sunk a submarine at the shipyard. So, but that's my recollection of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So.
All right. I do also want to hear the story. So, Chef, I'm going to let you take it from there of the window pane over in what we refer to as the Periscope building, now Factory OS, or the shop was shop number, or the building
So
was...
our shop was, all of Shop 06 was in that building at that time.
Okay.
During the shipyard, during the closure, all the way up to the closure, building
Okay.
678. So,
Well, why don't you tell me about how the pane came into being? Because we'll
Sure.
get to the punchline here in a minute.
So, right where that window pane was located, inside was my workbench.
Okay.
So we had, I don't know, it was a room about this size, roughly
Okay. 20 by 15 by 10, something like that.
something like that. And it was just one of the workrooms where all of us electronic mechanics would work. And we all had desks, workbenches, basically, with a bunch of drawers. And mine happened to be right there with the window panes right in front of me. So a friend of mine, Chris Voss,
Okay.
he, being the jokester that he is, back in those days, and I forget exactly what year it was.
Chef David's nodding along on
He was
this.
definitely a
But the
jokester.
I Heart thing was just going everywhere. I mean,
Okay.
So
This was a-
I Heart
this was a
this, I
meme.
Heart
This was a
that.
meme back in the
That was-
day.
That was a not a Mare Island meme, but it was just a media meme back in the day. So he thought that it would be cool to write I Heart GDS on the window pane right above my desk.
Perfect.
It took me, a couple hours before I figured it out. And everybody else in the room is just chuckling and laughing and everything.
What year is this again, remind me?
I would guess it's probably around mid 80s, 85.
Okay, so
86.
mid 80s. So, Chef, let's pick up this story
Okay.
in 2020, I don't know,
Sure.
22? I can't remember when it was this all happened.
So the window was still there after all these years. So what, 40 years later?
We'd go tours on Mare Island,
Yeah.
take people, my friends, his friends,
Yeah.
And show
we'd
them the
see
pane
building and show the window. Of course, it's reversed, but because
Sure,
we're looking
sure.
from the outside,
Sure.
but it's still there.
Right.
Yeah, and that was the big thing was I would always bring people on the island now that we had access to it because it was open to the public, and I'd take people past the building and say, hey, see that window right there? You see that faint writing in there? That's my dad's initials, and I Heart GDS, his best friend, painted that in the window at the time. And it just so happened that I knew someone that was a kind of a big deal here on the island by the name of Kent Fortner.
Yeah, God, big deal, huh?
So I went to Kent and I told him the whole story. And
Oh, which I loved.
Loved it. I mean, I can't not love it.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, there's this window that was above my dad's workbench in the shop that he worked at for 30 years. And you think it would be possible to maybe get that window out of this building? And Ken said, yeah, I know a guy. Of course he does. And so Kent made some phone calls and talked to the guys that were the company that was in the building at the time and
Yep.
the CEO of the building of the company, and told him the story. And the guy was like, yes, of course, you need to come get
He
this
loved
window.
it. He loved this story.
And so he set it all up for me, and I called Vallejo Glass, a local glass company, and got them involved and told them the story, and they just loved it. And everyone was on board for this project to get this window out to give back to my dad so he could have it for himself before it got broken or a rock went through it or whatever else could have happened. And I'm just so amazed that it didn't, because almost every other window around this window is damaged in one way or another. So plan today, called Vallejo Glass. They came out, they pulled the window out for me, they replaced it for me, didn't even charge me for it, which, I mean, I'm still amazed at that.
That's
They just
awesome.
love the story.
That's awesome.
I was like, I came prepared with cash and like, dude, no, we're not even going to charge you for this. Like, this is great. So I was able to get the window out. I gave it to one of my dad's really good friends, who's a great woodworker, and he built a frame for it out of some nice redwood. And then I was able to give the window back to my dad on his 70th birthday.
Ah, that's such a good story.
So,
Such a good story.
it is, it's just one of those family stories that it's just really special
Well,
and
I was
important to us.
I was honored to play a tiny part in that, but
You were huge.
to me, it's such a intersection of what goes on in Mare Island. There's this pride, there's this work, there's this heritage, there's this history, and there's this modern approach to like we're getting things done. And I believe the head of Mare Island Glass, I believe he worked on the island briefly, and then he was a cop after that. He's passed away since, actually. I don't know if I just found that out recently, but anyway, the whole story comes together. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up with that. These have been great stories. I cannot thank you guys enough for sitting down with me. This has been super fun. I was a little tired earlier today. I got fully energized after having this conversation, and we've all three been staring at this battery that's slowly going out on Gary's microphone. But you know what? We made it. I can see everything here, and this is going to sort of end our amateur hour bonus episode / foundation oral history. But it's important to me that we get this kind of stuff down while it's fresh in people's mind, while people are still around, while they can still count all 7 relatives that were here at different times. So anyway, David, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Chef.
Thanks for having me.
Gary, thank you so much for doing this with us. Yeah. And, tune in for the other stuff that the foundation and the podcast is doing. And thanks for listening.